What's the word? Flap? Say that word for me. Flapping through?
People that could live good moral lives, but their philosophy can't get them there.
Who am I? What am I? How did I get here? Machines don't ask that question.
And now, the Flaming Sword.
Hey Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing super swell. Darin, how are you?
All right, good.
Super swell, and no one else says it, and people make fun of me, but I'm going to keep saying it every once in a while.
I think that's fine. Does that come out of the 60s?
I hope not, because I wasn't alive.
I think it does.
That's a whole nother strange
I think that's some of that 60s hippie talk, I think.
No, but I do have a little joke just to get started today, Darin, if that's all right with you.
Well, I guess I was going to get into some theology, but I know you have to tell your jokes. So go ahead.
Well, no, it's kind of a fun one. It's I don't know if anyone ever heard of the skunk that went to church and sat in his own pew, but it's a holy but a goodie.
Oh man!
Half of our listeners just turned that dial.
And there goes the unsubscribers right now. Bam, bam, bam.
That's right. I don't know how we get into that, from that into apologetics.
We're going to get there. We were discussing last time, we had played a clip from William Lane Craig. We were discussing just basic apologetics, why we believe what we believe, why we believe in God. And then on his website, which is reasonablefaith.org, he had 8 reasons why we should believe in God. And we got through the first 2. And I'm just going to read them real quick. Number 1 is God is the best explanation for why anything exists. And then number 2, he is the best explanation for the origin of the universe. And we commented that those are pretty much the same thing. And then number 3, God is the best explanation of applicability of mathematics to the physical world. Now this one here is really, really good. So I'll let you comment first and then I'll jump in. But I think this is one of those we ought to discuss for a second.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as I mentioned last time, and I'm bringing that up because I know all of the people that listened last time are listening this time, and they've invited many of their friends, I'm sure. But math, for me, that's not something that, I mean, some people get just really excited about math kind of for its own sake. I'm not that guy, but I get more excited about math or science or even astronomy. I almost said cosmology. Cosmetology, whatever one has to do with the makeup, that's the one I'm more excited about. I get those confused, but I get interested in that because it's a way to really give God glory and just be amazed at what he's done. So how that gets back to what William Lane Craig says in point 3 is that he's saying these laws of mathematics or these principles seem to exist independently of people. Is that kind of your understanding?
Yes.
And that's an amazing thing, because if that's true, whether they're mathematical principles or sometimes they'll be referred to as laws of nature or other things, if those seem to be there independently of people, then somebody or something had to put them there.
Yeah, there are people who will even ask the question, would math exist if we didn't exist?
Right.
The deep philosophers really do ask that question.
Right.
Well, would there be math? And I just think that's a silly notion.
Right.
But he goes on, let me just read here a part of what it says. It says, if mathematical objects are just useful fictions, how is it that nature is written in the language of these fictions? The naturalist has no explanation for the uncanny applicability of mathematics to the physical world. By contrast, the theist has a ready explanation. When God created the physical universe, he designed it in terms of the mathematical structure which he had in mind. And then he breaks it down. Point A, or 1, would be if God did not exist, the applicability of mathematics would be just a happy coincidence. B, the applicability of mathematics is not just a happy coincidence, and therefore C, God exists. And that's kind of the synopsis of his it's a little bit larger argument there, but
right. Yeah, and I think again, even to make that, just to make it a little more general, even outside of mathematics, the fact that this God or this being seems to have created things in such a way that we have the ability as other creations of his to understand what it is that he did just sort of screams that in fact there is this creator, because otherwise we wouldn't even have any way to understand. And mathematics explains all kinds of things. And so what I hear him saying is, first of all, it's just the math itself is incredible, but then the fact that we have a way to understand it, how could that happen if there wasn't something there that this creator had made?
You got it.
Amen, brother.
Absolutely. Number 4, and this is a good one, the fine tuning of the universe.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes to my mind is well, if the sun was just a little bit further away, we'd freeze to death.
Yep.
And if the sun was just a little bit closer, we'd all burn up. In fact, I think did you mention that in your sermon?
I did that on a sermon last week. It was kind of funny.
So I robbed you of your glory there.
Yeah, that's all right. Luckily, there's at least one other example of fine tuning.
Let me interrupt you real quick. Just since I mentioned that, let people know you are a pastor. Do you want to just go ahead and just tell people about that real fast, and we'll get right back into this?
I am a pastor, and I've been at my current church a little over a year, and we're right towards the bottom of the beautiful state of Idaho, where a whole lot of people are moving right now for various reasons. But yeah, I just really love being here, and for a number of reasons, I'm talking a little bit about Romans 1 and that God created everything, and essentially either Paul, who wrote that letter, is essentially saying either people acknowledge that God created everything, or there are some people that don't acknowledge that. But that was one of the things that I did talk about was the sun.
Yeah.
Just one other example I like to think about that might be easy for people that don't have that innate ability to understand things like math and philosophy is you and I are both musicians, Darin, and if everybody can imagine a great big soundboard. Now they have these tiny little soundboards that do amazing things. But back in the day, like when I was playing rock bands, I mean, these soundboards were huge. And the way I understand fine tuning is that God has so orchestrated this universe that, let's say you had the best sound person, and if just one person came in and just slightly tweaked one knob out of potentially hundreds of knobs, the whole thing gets thrown into a tailspin. That's how fine-tuned our universe is.
Yeah, there's a guy by the name of Hugh Ross who is a astronomer or astrophysicist or whatever you call it, and he really does a lot of good work in that area. Yeah. So people can look him up too. What is Hugh Ross's? Can you think of his? Is it Reasons to Believe? Or Reasons to Believe, isn't it?
I think that is right. Google Hugh Ross.
Yeah. He's
got lots of books out. He's got lots of debates too that people can watch. And I've learned a lot from him.
So then going on, I mean, we may end up doing one on mathematics, and we could do a whole podcast on each one of these points. So we're just trying to give an overview here. You go on to point number 5. God is the best explanation of intentional states of consciousness.
I was watching a debate. This was actually, throw out a couple names here. This was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Bill Nye, the science guy, of course, he was taking the atheist position, and he was debating a man by the name of Ken Ham. But they had a Q&A afterwards. And sometimes when I watch debates, sometimes those are some of the best things when you just get questions from the audience. This person said, they kind of said, I don't know what the person's view was, that the person reading it didn't say, but they said, well, let's assume that there's no God that really created these things, that everything just evolved. How did all those things at some point get consciousness to the point where they could say, okay, I'm self-aware, which is essentially what consciousness means. And of course, that's the word
That's what I was looking for, the whole self-aware, the self-awareness. When I told you that story in the last podcast of when I was only 8 to 10 years old, where I was saying, who am I? What am I? How did I get here? Machines don't ask that question.
No.
It just doesn't work that way. So sorry to interrupt you, but I'll probably do it again at some point.
But that's where, in that particular debate, I actually felt, just from a debate standpoint, Bill Nye, I mean, he'd done a good job and he was well prepared, but there was no way for him to answer that question. I don't think there's any way for anyone to answer that question of where do we get this idea of self-awareness. In other words, how do we have the ability to even start asking questions about why am I here? What's my meaning? What's my purpose? If there isn't something that's created us. And I've been a Christian now for quite a few years, but I would say almost every day I'll wake up, and I'm not saying, oh, look what I do. I'm so thankful to the Lord, but just I'm still amazed that I have this thing called life. I have no idea. Sometimes I'll talk about this too in my preaching, that we can get so arrogant as human beings. But I heard somebody say one time, God just sneezed and there was a universe. And I know that's kind of a simplistic way to say it, but this God is not sort of like us and just a little bit more intelligent or a little bit better. He's infinitely better, and he's transcendent. And just imagine, none of us really can create anything at the end of the day. We just rearrange things that he's created, but he created beings with the ability to be self-aware. I mean, that's just astonishing to me.
Absolutely. Going on to point 6, God is the best explanation of objective moral values and duties.
Do you want me to go ahead and start with that one again?
Well, yeah. Joe, here's the deal. You're kind of like Michael Jordan when he got on a streak. I want to bust your streak here. So
All right. Well, this is another one that I love, because it's all of us. I would say this would be true of Christians or atheists. And I know most people would know this, but an atheist essentially is someone who's convinced there is no God. An agnostic would be someone who's not sure. Sometimes I'll talk about garden variety pagans just because it's kind of fun to say, but people who just aren't sure what they believe.
Have you heard Frank Turek on agnostics? And I'll probably get this wrong, but an agnostic says you can't have knowledge, but by them saying that, they're making a knowledge statement.
Right. I have heard him say that.
Yeah.
And that's like, just since you brought that up, that's like somebody saying, well, there is no objective truth.
Exactly.
I have just made an objective statement in saying that. There are lots of contradictions there that people don't realize. But all of us, I think all those categories of people probably want to be consistent in how they live. In other words, I want to have a reason for living the way I do. The thing with atheism, or somebody's an agnostic, is they might live a good life. They might be nicer than I am. I'm sure they're way nicer than Darin when he's had a bad day. But I'm just waiting to see if he's laughing. There's a little chuckle. But there are people that are not Christians, or that don't believe in a God of any sort, that could be nice people, that could live good moral lives, but their philosophy can't get them there, because they have absolutely no reason to live that way. Which means if you're an atheist and you're nice, or you love your kids and grandkids, you're a hypocrite. I mean, at the end of the day, that might sound kind of strong, but hypocrite just being you're not living life, because in atheism there is no creator, there is no objective truth, there's no reason to be moral, there's no reason to do anything, and so they're having to borrow from a Christian worldview, and a Christian worldview is that the reason that we have this idea of right and wrong that's objective is specifically and only because there's a creator that's given them to us.
Yeah, it's I know that they accuse us sometimes of saying something like, well, we say that they can't be good. You have to put it within the context of what God calls good, because like you said, there are a lot of good atheists. There are a lot of what's the word? Say that word for me. Philanthropy.
Philanthropy.
How do you? Can you say it?
Philanthropist? Philanthropist? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, those guys. Philanthropist. I think I got it right that time.
You got it.
It was better.
And they give a lot of money. They give a lot of, they donate millions and billions, some of these rich multimillionaires and billionaires that we see in the world. But it doesn't mean anything compared to God's goodness that we're accountable for, that we can only get through Christ. And that's the difference there. So we're not saying that there can't be goodness in the world. It's just where is your goodness being drawn from, and what are you looking to for your goodness, when we should recognize that we are created creatures, have a moral duty to whoever created us.
Right. So one thing I want to mention too that's related to this a little bit indirectly, but again, from an atheistic perspective, we're just another animal. And from a Christian worldview, but one of the things that separates us is because we do have this sense of right and wrong, where animals are just acting from instincts. We wouldn't see another animal, hunt down another animal and think, boy, they just sinned, they've got to go repent for mauling that animal. That's just what they do. But we as human beings seem to be the only creatures, at least that we're aware of, that have, sometimes philosophers call it the sense of ought. Like I ought to do this, but I'm doing something else. And that seems to be another thing that speaks really strongly of this creator behind all of that.
Yeah. The next one, number 7, is the very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists.
That's pretty deep, Darin. That's a deep one.
Were you going to discuss it?
Yeah. Yep. I think, where would that thought even come from? And I think that's a little bit of the result of this argument. And why would I even have this idea that there might be a God? And then you couple with that I'm not the best historian by any stretch, but I have some hold on it. And essentially, since the beginning of people, all cultures have had some way of recognizing that there's some being outside of themselves, and you see it in their art. We hear it in music. We have even for somebody who might not be a Christian or might not look at God in any type of religious sense, they're going to be aware that these cultures have all had this idea of something outside of themselves. Where did that come from? Why does most of the planet, throughout all of history, think that there is some God outside of themselves? That's just by itself. Maybe that's not a strong enough argument, but it certainly plays into that.
Absolutely. I think we discussed that before, that just like you said, just the concept of God means there has to be a God, because if from evolution that would have never came about, there would be no reason to seek out something that isn't there.
Right.
All right. Number 8. Now, this is probably going to be the hardest one as far as where people will feel it's more subjective, where he says God can be personally known and experienced, which we agree, obviously. But I can just see the atheist or the agnostic or whoever rolling their eyes and just thinking, well, yeah, everybody says they experience their God. The Mormons experience their God. The Jehovah's Witness experience their God, and Hindu, and you could go on and on. So there's a difference, though, in Christianity. There's a difference, and I think we'll probably get into that a little bit more, either the next podcast or the next, as we get more into Scripture. But just from a philosophical or subjective point of view, how would you answer that? How would you, because Bill's putting that out there on his website like that's just self-evident. And I don't think it's that easy, especially since I see these atheist debates, and I know you've watched a lot of atheist debates with Christians. So how would you handle that one?
I think, and you mentioned Mormons, and there are many other examples too, but since Mormonism is maybe a little more well-known as a worldview or a religion, one of the things that Mormons will do, and I don't want to speak out of turn for them, so if I'm not getting this quite right, I apologize, but essentially they will teach you some things, and they'll say, pray about this, and you should feel, they call this burning in the bosom. You're going to feel something, yeah. and that could happen to people, and you can see, like you mentioned, people rolling their eyes, say, okay, well, anybody could do that. But I think you have to put this idea of a personal experience with God in, if I can put it this way, we're talking about this big category, which would be why we believe what we believe. And that personal experience just in and of itself maybe isn't enough. Somebody could say, well, that's just an experience you had, or you just really believed that and you wanted it to be true. But if I have this personal experience with this God, and then there is also evidence for that particular God that I believe in, that's different. And that's what you would have to do with Mormonism. Just to use that example again, you'd have to say, okay, well, this is this feeling I have, and now I would have to test the other tenets or the other truths of the Mormon faith to see if in fact they were true, or from a Hindu perspective, or whatever it might be. And so with Christianity, that in of itself isn't enough to give strong evidence for God. But if in fact I have this sense that I have this relationship with this personal God, and then the other truths of Christianity teach me about this personal God, and it all lines up, and we'll get to this in another podcast, and there's archaeological evidence galore, there's manuscript evidence for the texts of Scripture galore, and we see all these things over and over that are tested. And then in addition to that, I have this experience of this God who's personal. Then I think that has to be a huge factor in the equation.
Okay, brother, believe it or not, we've already about out of time, but we did get through William Craig's 8 points. And yes, we blasted through them, but we're hoping in future podcasts, we may discuss individual ones where we're going to be looking at all sorts of arguments. All right, folks, we'll see you next time.
To her as she looks in the mirror, prepares herself for the day ahead. To the well to get some water. You never know what a day will bring.
You've been listening to The Flaming Sword. Until next time, remember, love the sheep. Shoot the wolves.